Hello, hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are dialing in from. I can see our attendees streaming in. So now we're up to, yep, I think we can begin in about 30 seconds. We'll let everyone come in and hope you're all doing well. Great. So I'm Divika from CARMA and I'm head of marketing for Asia. And we've put together this really exciting webinar for you. So we are going to be exploring how media coverage shapes CEO reputation. And trust me, we've got some fascinating insights coming up that the panelists are going to share. We are drawing from CARMA's latest CEO Media Index series, where we've analyzed thousands of articles to uncover what really works when it comes to executive visibility. Before we start, some housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded, so you will get to watch this afterwards. Please feel free to use the chat for any questions throughout, and we'll tackle them in our Q&A session towards the end. Now, I'm thrilled to introduce our expert panel for today's chat. First up, Kali Sakas, Chief Insights Officer at CARMA. Kali brings over 20 years of leadership in communications measurement, delivering award-winning research for some of the world's most recognizable brands. She's also serving on the AMEC board and chairs the Asia Pacific chapter. Next, Pearl Ong, Insights Consultant for Asia at CARMA. Pearl is the brilliant researcher behind the CEO Media Index series that we'll be discussing today. She's an AMEC certified communications and analysis specialist with a decade of experience in research and media analysis. And finally, David Blecken, research and insights editor at Earn First. David brings nearly 2 decades of reporting and research across the global communications industry, including senior editorial roles at Campaign Asia Pacific, and now he's at Earn First. Fantastic to have you all with us. And over to you, Pearl, to get us started.
Thank you, Davika. So I'm really honored to be kickstarting this discussion. To begin with, I wanted to bring in the recent research work that we have produced in CARMA. So we have recently completed a 3-part series of the CEO Media Index report, where we looked at 10 different CEOs across Philippines, Indonesia, and Singapore. So what we looked at is how they are represented and how they're being portrayed in the media. This is actually a very fascinating topic because for many years, I worked with various clients across industry to help them measure and evaluate their leaders' performance, and also to demonstrate the impact that leaders have when they are present in the media. Many times, the teams tell us that it's a challenge to convince their leaders to be in front of the media and to speak about it. So thinking about this is how the research was being developed. We wanted to showcase how we could help that. Touching a little bit on the methodology of the report, so to give some context to what the report is about. While we were looking at the 3 series, we wanted to make sure that the parameters are very consistent so that we are able to do the like-for-like comparison. So we looked at CEOs from a selected reputable list of companies ranked by revenue. Singapore, we took the Straits Times Index. For Philippines, we took the Business World 1000 of Corporation. For Indonesia, we did the Fortune Indonesia 100. From there, we shortlisted our CEOs and further identified the 10 CEOs that we wanted to measure through the volume of articles published about them during the period of time. Now, the coverage are then taken from Tier 1 media outlets from the market. When we're looking at Tier 1, it's influential media outlets based on reach and circulation. Articles with CEO statements or mentions were being analyzed, and we looked at topics, sentiment, and trust attributes. There are a lot of insights in those reports, but today what I'm going to take you through are the insights that really speaks to me and are one of my favorite insights from the report. So the first insights that I want to talk about is actually sustainability is still a sweet spot for CEO. We all know that in 2020 to 2022, sustainability was the peak influence at that point of time. But when 2023 hit, sustainability seems to have taken a back seat, and now AI and digitalization is up and coming. But what we see here when we looked at the CEO report is that sustainability is still very relevant and CEOs are still talking about it and the media just adores them. So in the Philippines, CEOs, all of the CEO prioritizes sustainability. And 43% of the CEO coverage actually talked about sustainability. And when we looked at Indonesia, there was a very clear trend that we are seeing. When a CEO talks a lot about sustainability, they earned more media favor than a CEO that does not. Indonesia also gave us a very interesting insights here because from Indonesia's narrative, we are able to see how CEO distinguish themselves from their peers when it comes to sustainability domains. CEOs that really linked the national development, the economic growth, with their sustainability efforts of the company are those that we see really standing out ahead of its peers and also being earning more media favor than CEO that purely talks about sustainability from a company's perspective. So what I'm saying here is that environmental impact is still very relevant and significant, and CEOs are clearly prioritizing it across the regions. And why not? Because the media is still caring about it and still giving that space for the CEO to talk about it. Now, the second trend that we are looking at when it comes to CEO is that social impact is becoming more of a strategic lever for CEOs. CEOs that champion that narrative is actually standing out ahead of its peers more than usual now. A very good example that I want to bring up here is the CEO of Petron and San Miguel, which is Ramon. During that period of time when we were looking at his coverage, he was not only covered in the media for corporate-led initiatives such as the San Miguel Child Health Program, which talks about underprivileged community, but even his personal actions were being put out by the media, where he was covering all the medical costs of victims that was involved in a car crash incident at the international airport. With all of this together, he was able to demonstrate ethical leadership and pull ahead of his peers. Now, the next case study and successful CEO who utilized social impact to communicate and leverage their advantage is Mr. Wee Ee Chong from UOB. So we all know Mr. Wee. Mr. Wee has been a CEO for UOB for a long time, and he has been championing the social impact aspects of the narrative. And that is even before what we are monitoring. He has been talking about it for many, many years. Let's take an example of the UOB Painting of the Year award. Mr. Wee has been that spokesperson from the beginning to the end, and he makes sure that he communicated his commitment and passion towards it. So social impact is something that CEOs are utilizing and leveraging on to making themselves more distinct from their peers. Now, I want to move forward to probably my most favorite insights from the report, because these findings that we found showcase how a leader can move beyond a legacy figure and build their own personality, persona, and credibility. We all know that in 2025 March, we saw the succession of Tan Shu Shan from Piyush Gupta. And we all know that Piyush Gupta is a well-loved, well-respected CEO, and the media just adores him. We have been looking at his media presence for many, many years, and oftentimes the media just like talking about him. And the media has attributed DBS leadership in digital banking to his expertise and his guidance. So such leadership transition is often very challenging, I would say, because the media tend to compare the past and present achievements. But what we see here with this succession is that there are no comparison. There are no comparison, there are no lingering achievements of Piyush Gupta. The media was really just giving the space to Tan Shu Shan and letting her build her own personality. So DBS CEO Tan Shu Shan was the top for Singapore CEO in terms of visibility, in terms of sentiment. There was zero negative that was found from her end. She was highlighted for bringing DBS to become the Global Bank of the Year by The Banker, and her own personal achievements, such as being in the Forbes 2025 top listed world's most powerful women, was also in the coverage. Likewise, the media has given her the space to form her own authoritative voice, where she was talking about AI and digitalization, bringing that human AI centric approach and how she can bring forth DBS to be a generative AI bank. So what is very interesting here that we really love was that Mr. Piyush Gupta and Ms. Tan Shu Shan, they both have very similar coverage when it comes to what the media are talking about them. But the media are not comparing about Tan Shu Shan's achievements to Piyush Gupta. It was purely her. So this really shows how DBS has successfully transitioned from a very high profile leader to another strong leader. I will be talking on the last insights that we have for the report. It was really hard for me to find the insights that I wanted to put in here because there's so many of them. But the last insight I wanted to bring up about this report was media never forgets. Why we say that is because when we are looking at the Singapore media and particularly looking at the negative coverage, we notice that strong performances influence perception of leadership. And when you look at the bar chart over there, all the rates that we are looking at is all pretty much linked to the company's financial results. But then again, strong performance do not guarantee positive CEO coverage. And that's where we found out that the media doesn't forget. So the Singaporean media, despite talking about a strong financial results of city development, they decided to put in the negative story about the CEO that was resolved 6 months ago. So that's something to take note of. And that's the reason why CDL CEO was having more negative than his peers. On the other hand, when we were looking at regional, while the media doesn't forget, we also noted that there are some regional media that are more forgiving than others, and that's where the Indonesia media came about. So the Indonesian media, what we looked at, reward CEOs on their responses to negative narrative. So when a leader comes out and talk about it being constructive, the media tend to acknowledge the response and move on. So a particular case study that I want to bring forward is the Pertamina CEO. During the time that we were looking at his coverage, he saw some scrutiny from the finance minister about a delay in the refinery. He didn't not talk about it. He came out. He was not defensive. He was more of taking it as a feedback for progress and improvement. And the media reacted really well with it when you start moving away from blame to progress. So after those 2 days, the media just dropped the issue and the issue did not resurface ever again. Well, what we are trying to say here is that overall, CEOs do get scrutinized in the media. It is the media after all. They will try and nitpick your leaders and they'll try and get something exciting out of the way. But how the leaders respond to it is actually really important, and especially for a media environment that is more forgiving like Indonesia.
Pearl, you've talked about sustainability, you've talked about social impact. David, I'd like to invite you to share your perspective on some of the trends you have seen. In particular, perhaps you can shed some light on, is more volume more favorable for the CEO? Are you seeing more changes in what the media would like to cover, more sustainability stories or less? Please do share with us.
Thank you, Viveka. Yeah, I mean, I would say, first of all, the qualities that build trust in a CEO, I don't think have changed. I don't think they will really change, and those
Mm.
qualities are things like being authentic and simply being human. And this applies equally whether you're a journalist, whether you're a member of the public, an investor, or an employee. I think you always want to see those things. Um, and we talked about, or Pearl talked about scrutiny. I think, in times like this, when the world feels especially uncertain or unpredictable, it's natural to expect that the CEO will come under greater scrutiny from journalists and from all stakeholders really. Um, but we've seen if we look back to the pandemic years, um, just a few years ago, we saw the CEO suddenly become noticeably more human. They were appearing with family members, with pets, and so forth. And since then, we've seen them sort of. We've. I'm talking generally. Obviously, there are all. CEOs are all kinds of personalities, and this is a big generalization. But we've seen a sort of. We've seen them revert to a more natural state where they're less visible, less outspoken on social topics. Um, and it seems, sort of weighing up how human they can afford to be or how human they need to be. And I think for many CEOs, they feel less pressure to present themselves as virtuous, to talk about things like diversity, empathy, social justice, this kind of thing. And in some cases, they actually feel emboldened to question these things more vocally than they might have done a few years ago. Um, we're also seeing people adopt a sort of strategic silence. Being silent can in itself be seen as a statement. Um, so, yeah, all these things are happening. Pearl made the point that CEOs who talk about things like sustainability um, and social impact do still stand out in the media. But I think the important thing to note is the fact that CEOs are generally a bit less vocal on these topics isn't necessarily a bad thing. Talking too much can be counterproductive, and I think a lot of journalists would roll their eyes when they hear another person talking about sustainability, and it, if it doesn't seem genuine. So I think we're seeing, well, I mean, I was talking to someone the other day in Australia who said he'd seen a shift from thinking, what do we want to be seen to stand for, to what can we credibly prove that we stand for. So I think more thought might be going into the
Mm,
message.
mm,
Um, and I think journalists are also asking more questions when they see something that appears misaligned, when they see messaging that doesn't match the corporate, what a corporation is doing. So I think leaders are thinking more carefully about, whether what they say is authentic. Is there a risk of alienating people?
mm,
And also simply will the business benefit if I talk about this?
mm.
Um, so
David,
yeah,
the theme that I found very interesting from what you're just saying and from Pearl's research is this idea that has been persistent and present for many years of walking the walk, talking the talk, walking the walk, and this idea of really being true and authentic about, well, this is what we actually stand for, came through on an individual level as well, especially in the Philippines, where we saw this is what we stand for at a corporate level, but here are my actions in my personal life that also endorse that corporate presence. So we do want continuity, and don't want a gap between the talk and the walk.
exactly. I mean, you want to see um, coherence.
Yeah.
So I think it's obviously if there's a gap between what somebody says and what the business does, there's a reputational risk,
Mm,
and there's under increased scrutiny, there's a high risk that that will be noticed and the leader will be called out. But I think the leaders that are able to to sort of sustain a positive perception from journalists and from the public. I think they achieve that when everything aligns, their actions, the values that they present, the purpose they talk about, and their messaging. When all these things are consistent over time, I think that is what contributes um, to a strong reputation.
Really interesting.
Thank you, David. That was really insightful. Kali, I would like to invite you now to talk a little bit about a very interesting topic, the impact of LLMs and AI.
Yeah. Thank you, Divika. I'm going to walk through section 2, and section 2 is really about the emerging trends that relate to leadership, LLMs, and AI. So walking through an extension of Pearl's research, bringing in a lot of the trends that we're seeing in CARMA's deep analysis of the LLM landscape, but also AI. I wanted to start it by acknowledging the role of the CEO and how that is changing. And I think that while we're analyzing leadership or C-suite media performance, we need to be mindful that these are difficult roles, they're complex roles, and they're becoming more complex. So CEOs have less time, more pressure, less time to deliver results. If we move to the next slide, there are some interesting things, and I think those that are communicating about CEOs or working with CEOs, some interesting trends that we're seeing. CEOs are not staying in their role. We're seeing a higher rate of CEOs actually departing. So 234 CEOs departed their role last year. So this insight about that succession planning at DBS that we've analyzed, absolutely crucial for PR and communications teams. The baton handover between leadership is going to become more rapid now. It's going to become more frequent, and we're going to have to, I think if anyone can do it as well as DBS has done, study that. And I think it's what good looks like from our point of view. The average tenure of CEOs is getting shorter. So it's gone from about an average of about 8 years. We're at about 6.6 now. And the turnover is about 21% higher than the 8-year average. Two things are driving this. CEOs are not staying in their roles, but there's also less patience from a board level. So boards are acting earlier to make changes in those exec teams. So a lot of important trends in the CEO landscape, in the leadership landscape, that actually impact on communications and PR. I'm now going to talk about Gen AI. And this obviously is a huge part of our life at CARMA and of a communicators landscape at the moment. Gen AI search, so LLM searches, means that earned media is having its 15 minutes of fame again. It's definitely back in the spotlight. Why is it having this moment? Well, when people search ChatGPT or Perplexity or Claude, up to 89% of the links that come back in that answer are being driven by earned media. So PR and comms having a much, much stronger influence on GEO, Gen AI, than they did in SEO, having a huge impact. Second trend with Gen AI search is that we're seeing the preferences of searching different for different demographics. Google search, have no doubt, still commands a 90% share of all search globally, but we're seeing Gen Z prefer to search ChatGPT or go straight to TikTok and search for products, information about companies there. So we need to be mindful of those emerging trends. Within the LLM landscape, OpenAI has the greatest share. So 83% of all generative AI tool traffic goes to ChatGPT. Obviously, the first big one out there, it still has a very, very commanding presence in that landscape. So that obviously gets us to our next question. When we're talking about CEOs, when we're talking about leadership, how are your leaders showing up in these LLMs? If this is an increasing trend and we're in earned media, how are you showing up? let's have a look at some things that might be helpful in terms of where the LLMs get their information from. We've done a little bit of research here, and we know that LLMs are going to draw from credible earned and owned media. They're going to go for those foundational, high credibility sources to give you your results in the quickest possible time. But there's very, very different sources that each of these platforms go to. When we look at Wikipedia, when we look at ChatGPT, it most frequently draws information about CEOs from Wikipedia and your company website. So if you want ChatGPT to have the correct information and the right positioning of your leadership team, update Wiki, update your website. These are things that really are the main draw cards for ChatGPT. Generally, with ChatGPT, we find that it skews toward hard news and business titles as well. So Forbes, FT, all of those Time, all of those financial titles, incredibly important for ChatGPT as well. Moving to Perplexity, we see a completely different profile. If you analyze your CEO or your executive team on Perplexity, you will see that it is drawing frequently from LinkedIn. And here is a massive opportunity for communications. It's a massive opportunity for CEOs to actually have more influence on the answers that we're getting back as people search for your organization or for your products or for your leadership. Claude does walk it to its own beat, and we find this across all industries. We find this across all organizations. For CEOs specifically and CEOs within the regions that Pearl has analyzed, Bloomberg was heavily, heavily cited. The Edge in Malaysia, Tatler was important, but really interestingly, Grokopedia features as a citation quite frequently on Claude, not on Perplexity, not on ChatGPT. So this is a little heads up to say, okay, you might need to have a look at your tier one media list and then look at your LLM reading list, right? What are the sites that your leaders are being quoted on? Have you got the up-to-date information on those sources so that those citations can work for you? I strongly believe here that LinkedIn provides a win-win opportunity for PR and comms and leaders alike. We not only have this double win, so the first win is about creating a community and a connection directly with your audience stakeholders on LinkedIn. We've seen a number of incredible examples where leaders in the first person, in their casual clothes, talking about what they're passionate about, where their career paths have taken them. This is universally endorsed on LinkedIn, and we tend to really relate to this type of news. Even though it might be written by a PR and comms team or an executive assistant somewhere, this content does work. Now, in an LLM world, it works harder because now, but especially Perplexity, is grabbing this content and pulling it into its answers. So you get a win-win. And Pearl, you mentioned at the start that we often work with organizations that have difficulty getting time with their CEO, making sure that the CEO can speak to the media or can be more active in social media. This is the strongest case that I've seen to really make sure that you're leveraging LinkedIn because it's giving you a double benefit here. With all opportunities, there is also risk. And Pearl's research really did show that there are what we call shadows of the past, ghosts from the past that come in to haunt organizations and CEOs on big news days. Financial results, the very, very biggest thing. And while most of our tier one business titles, they'll report the results and sometimes they'll bring back ghosts and shadows from the past into that reporting. The other huge threat usually comes up is executive pay, CEO pay, right? While some people can celebrate that, there sometimes is a negative backlash towards that. Just as that happens in traditional media, LLMs have long memories too. And I wanted to speak a little bit about the nature and why that comes through. Obviously, the LLMs like ChatGPT have a training material, right? So they've been trained on a vast amount of content. That is their parametric knowledge. Now, for ChatGPT 5, that training material cuts off at August 2025. So there's going to be nothing about your leaders or your organization going into the training material since then. When we ask a question, it's going to the quick on-the-fly search results. So it's searching the web for something that can also match and bring up through its and match with its parametric knowledge. This is where the citations come from. This is where its trust in credible and big brand media titles can have quite an adverse effect. So you can see, we've seen it with CEOs being quoted, negative news from 15 years ago has been cited in LLM answers. So it can resurface what we call ghosts from the past. It can bring through things that you think aren't even on your risk register anymore. They're not on the radar, but new audiences can be resurfacing this content through their searching. I wanted to talk a little bit before we finish up about leading in the AI era. And this has become quite an iconic photo. It's obviously showing many of our tech leaders at an event. And one thing is very, very comical and telling in this photo. And that's, if you look at Sam Altman, that's that the Anthropic CEO and Sam Altman refused to actually unite in this photo. So what we're seeing is the rise of these tech AI leaders that have huge rivalries, have huge feuds, and are really having a battle for talent and a battle for their outlook on AI and the risks and opportunities. So we have a new generation of tech leaders that are very newsworthy and are potentially shaping what we see as how leaders behave and how leaders should behave. So let's move on to a little bit more about media analysis. CARMA has just recently published a report on the perceptions of AI in global media. We analyzed 12,000 articles on AI. We complemented that analysis with market research over 19 markets. And we wanted to have a look at the way that media was positioning AI, but also how we felt, what our hopes and fears and dreams of AI. Very relevant to our webinar today is that the CEOs of organizations are completely owning the AI discussion. So when you look at all of the commentary on AI over the last year, 43% of that has come from CEOs of organizations. Now, up until this point, it's been they've owned the narrative, and that has been specifically positive about the business benefits of AI. So it's been a very, very good thing, but I would question whether it will be a good thing moving forward. Let's have a look at how this might get more complicated very quickly. What you can see here is a post from the Australian Financial Review in Australia. And for me, it is the first red flag that PR and comms needs to have a look at. The emerging challenge right now is that communicating AI-led change has just become a whole lot more complex. You're walking into an environment where the media are openly calling BS on AI job cuts and calling bad management the reason for job cuts rather than AI. We're also having this, experts are warning of AI washing for these announcements. So I think, Pearl, you've seen DBS calling them out again, but they've done an incredible job in the past about changes to their workforce with AI transformation. I think it's going to be much, much harder for future announcements because you're coming into a more hostile, more complex environment where media are not willing to take the AI washing. They're willing to accuse you of doing that. So it's going to be, unfortunately, a little bit tougher for our CEOs if they're still the ones communicating that change. Pearl, we've got some takeaways, and I'll pass over to you to walk through really what we think are the most important things that we want communicators to take away from today's session.
Yeah, so thank you, Kali. So the first thing is that it's really a big advantage of getting a CEO more active on media and social media, as Kali have mentioned about on LinkedIn and how the LLM models are bringing in the LinkedIn activities of your CEO, and how earned media is resurfacing on LinkedIn. So having that presence is very important. Even if it is more difficult, the benefit is definitely there. The second key takeaway here is competitor benchmarking. So now it's becoming more fundamental when it comes to leadership performance because what good looks like, we wouldn't know unless we compare it with the peers of the industry. You want to know where the crowded spaces are, the similar messaging that the CEOs are coming out, the white spaces where you are putting your leaders out and trying to dominate that space. Apart from that, competitive benchmarking gives you that learning opportunity where you can see what good looks like for other leaders and how they came about with scrutiny and learn from that on any potential cases that could happen. The third point is show the whole person. I think David talked about it, Kali talked about it, I talked about it. We can't say enough of that. The media loves it, by the way, as seen from the Philippines media. They not only want to know your CEO as a company CEO, they want to know the CEO as a person. They want to know what do they do, how are they like outside of work, how do they actually lead the company based on their personality and their ethics and their morals. So really showing that complete person and holistic view of the CEO would really benefit not just the reputation of company, but credibility ahead. And media loves it. I'll pass on to Kali to talk about the
Yeah,
last point for the key takeaway.
absolutely. And I don't want to be all doom and gloom today, Pearl, Divika, and David, but there is another layer of complexity and a layer that we need to be very mindful of when we're potentially trying to get our leadership teams or our CEOs more visible in the media. We're in the middle of a conflict, and the US-Iran conflict at the moment, we've analyzed obviously over 6 million articles globally around that conflict, and the number one narrative from every region, no matter where you are, is uncertainty and vulnerability. So when we're talking about leadership, I think it's very important to be mindful of how insecure and how vulnerable people are, your audiences are actually feeling. Now that's not just about our businesses in the UAE or Saudi. This is Australian audiences right through Japan, Hong Kong. It didn't matter where people were. We're all impacted by the supply chain issues. We're all really having to test our resilience with personal impact for the conflict. So you're communicating into people. You need to be mindful that they're vulnerable, they're uncertain. The upside would be that you can provide clarity and stability through that time, but it's something to be very mindful of. And interested to hear David's thoughts on that in our discussion now.
Yes, I mean, I think the current crisis, something that we found in a recent piece that we looked at on it was not so much about external facing communications, but how CEOs or how leaders are talking internally to their staff, was that a message that came across was that the visibility of a CEO and their willingness to engage really makes a big difference. Just as we saw again during the pandemic. This is happening sometimes, but not always. And I would just say this, I think this applies internally and externally. What the CEO says to employees, it shouldn't be vastly different to what they say to the media. I think delivering a static message and then disappearing, as some leaders do, um, achieves very little, and it can actually make things worse. Um, but on the other hand, speaking to people in human terms, remaining visible and as accessible as possible. I mean, no one expects a CEO to be accessible to everyone at all times, but you know, being as accessible as possible does go a long way to creating reassurance and also strengthening morale for the building lasting morale, you know, which can endure
Mm,
beyond a crisis. And I, you know, this I don't think this is revelatory
mm,
when we think about what we typically respond well to or badly to as people.
mm,
So,
Perfect. I would like to ask you, David, one question from your
hmm,
experience, from an editorial perspective. Let's talk a little bit about the AI transformation as well
yeah.
that Kali has covered. And do share from your perspective, how is that changing the way leaders are showing up and how they are taking charge of this topic? Have you seen some more coverage? Have you seen some more uptake and more trends? Thank you.
I mean, I think there are two points really. One is uh, consistency and coherence, as we talked about. We said that was very important for the media, you know, regardless of AI. But I think that those things are also really important for how somebody shows up in AI
Mm,
search. So, I mean, if they have a consistent and coherent message,
mm,
and their actions are also seen as consistent, then they're likely to have, the, you know, they're likely to be rewarded, I suppose, by generative AI. The more fragmented the narrative appears, the more risk there is that the machine
mm.
will just sort of flatten flatten it or get it wrong. Um, so I mean that's one way that I see it. Um, and in terms of how leaders are dealing with AI, the topic of AI, obviously it's AI can be seen as the most pressing sort of transformation that CEOs need to lead.
Mm,
And good communication is central to getting people on board. I think a lot of AI transformation doesn't work out because the trust isn't there. So, you know,
mm,
you made the point, Carly made the point that a lot of talk is about the business benefits of
mm,
AI. But you know, from an employee perspective, what a lot of people take that to mean is that their job is at risk.
yeah.
They'll be that you know the quest for efficiency will eliminate their roles, and you know so this trust building has to happen. So the CEO has to, I think, talk more about that in the media narrative, and also internally, and listen to the concerns of different
Mm,
stakeholders, especially the employees. I think it's
mm,
rather than assuming that everyone is really thrilled about AI and ready to embrace it.
mm.
Um, yeah.
David, and Pearl, I think we might see a change here in terms of who is given the communication, the front spot in terms of AI transformation. Obviously, we've seen that CEOs have led it, and that's been an incredibly positive thing for CEOs, and they've generated very positive coverage. If we're right, if there is a turning point here and that it's about to get a bit messy, would it not be smarter to put your riskier topics, if you're going to have some backlash over job cuts, to another spokesperson in your organization? Why would we risk the CEO reputation with that message? I'm interested in what you think. I certainly think that they've done very, very well from this point forward. But I'm thinking, do we really think that CEOs should own sustainability? Should not that be the Chief Sustainability Officer? Should we get somebody else to actually own the digital transformation, the AI transformation? Just a thought. Love your views.
I mean, I think I don't have the answer to who it should be, but I mean, I suppose it varies by, you know, depending on
Mm,
the organization. But I think what I would say is whoever can talk about the topic with the most
mm,
authority and with the most knowledge. You know, again, that word authenticity, being able to, you know, so if it's sustainability, the person who is most knowledgeable about it should be the one
mm,
to talk about it, I think. And with AI, you know, I don't think the CEO should necessarily um, shy away from those difficult
yeah.
conversations. It's not a case of passing the buck to somebody else, but just whoever it makes most sense to address that issue, I think. Mm.
We obviously at CARMA we analyze financial results announcements all the time. They're very, very big events for our clients, and we often see this, not a battle, but a tension between who will lead this between CFO and CEO. And it sometimes works very, very well to have the CEO standing at the front and facing the music, so to speak. But that expertise that other people in the exec team bring
Mm,
can be overlooked. And I think one of the things that we advocate is that this you have an executive team, and it's about really making sure that you're building everybody up to potentially support the business publicly rather than having everything on the shoulders of the CEO. I'm not sure if you've got a view on that, Pearl or David.
mm. I think I agree with you, Carly. I feel like a lot of times the shoulder to talk about the commitment, those big topics are on the CEO, and there's a lot of scrutiny on people wanting to hear from the CEO what they think about this roadmap, what they think about that. But I do feel that bringing in an expert in that field, like the CSO, or even now there's the Chief Digital Officer, if I'm not wrong, for a lot of brands, could actually add value to have more technical aspect to it. But the CEO should not shy away from talking about it because it should be something they believe in and also
Mm.
advocate for it. But the other executives should be supporting the CEO to come up with those technical aspects and expertise to help build that credibility ahead.
Thank you.
I think it might also be. Sorry, I was just going to say. I think it might also be a question of who communicates best. You know, sometimes those other executives don't necessarily have they're not trained in communicating externally or yeah, or even internally. I mean, to a big audience. So I mean, I think often it falls on the CEO because they are seen as the people who can communicate best. But maybe it's an opportunity to invest in raising other people in the organization up so that they can talk about these things more meaningfully.
Thank you. I thought the insights were a fantastic answer to one of the questions we have on our chat. What are your recommendations for clients with CEOs who are media shy but still
Mm.
need that coverage? So perhaps a little bit more, Kali, perhaps if you'd like
Yeah.
to expand a little bit on this.
I think the first thing to remind ourselves of is that our points about the CEO role becoming high pressure, a lot rests on that shoulder. So being mindful that even though if we come to the world from a PR and comms lens, that's one aspect of a CEO's role. So absolutely very challenging to get that. The second thing that is important to keep in mind is that this is a challenge that most organizations globally have, that you're not alone, that it is quite a universal challenge to get executives, especially CEOs, more visible, more out there. What we have found works is these almost like a business case, Divika. So to show the benefits of getting that safe space for CEOs to say, okay, please go to Davos. This is an important event. Here is the data to support what happens to your profile and what happens to the business's profile when you do go to Davos and speak. Or this is, the risks are now, the risks and the wins around LinkedIn. The risks are quite low. You own that, right? There's a risk of backlash from an employee or people that can comment on your posts. But when seeing less and less of those big risks being big backlash against LinkedIn CEOs on LinkedIn, so slowly and surely build it up to be the norm by building trust along the way. So one activity at a time, use data to really make that case strong. That's what we've seen work, especially with Davos, especially with LinkedIn. Really making sure that they've got the buy-in in the way they're being positioned is there. So I think Pearl and I do a lot of work giving the data to comms teams to try and position their CEO in the strongest way. And I think if you've got buy-in from the CEO on how they want to be portrayed, it actually works a lot better. I hope I've answered the question uh, from our audience.
Perfect. I would like to share another question. By the way, thank you all. These questions are really interesting and they're opening up the discussion even further. Here's one that was voted quite a few times. How can we fix if the AI brings back ghosts from the past?
I I One thing, an important thing to note about not ghosts, but misinformation. If you are seeing incorrect information being resurfaced in LLMs, please be proactive. Please report it. Each of the platforms, each of them have a mechanism where you can report misinformation. Make sure that you're understanding how you're showing up, and then if there is misinformation, making sure you're reporting that. Other than that, Divika, I think having strong make control what you can control. You can control your company website, your LinkedIn, your news, your press releases. You can look at Grokpedia, you can look at Wikipedia. There are so many things that you can do to optimize, to make sure that the right information or the narratives and messages that you would prefer to be retrieved come back. So that's, I think, go on the front foot. Definitely be proactive about misinformation, but on the front foot with all your other comms. I'm not sure whether Pearl or David has anything to add for that.
I think I'll just add one point about knowing which outlets are bringing out the ghosts in the
Yeah.
past. I think like if it's a tier 3 outlets, do we really matter? If it's a tier 1 outlet, is that something that we need to touch on a little bit more on why and understand why they're bringing the ghosts from the past? So again, using data, right? Trying to figure out what's going on and building media relationships. A lot of our comms teams are building media relationships with those outlets. So when you have a strong relationship with a particular journalist or an outlet, you can control the narrative a little bit more. But then again, it's really looking at the data. Where is it surfacing in the media point of view? And what outlets are pulling those things out?
Fantastic answer. David, from an editorial perspective, I also want to add, what is the role of exclusive interviews today? And perhaps you can also share on that.
The role of exclusive interviews. I mean, I think any journalist or any editor values the opportunity for an exclusive interview. And I think simply if something is exclusive, then there's likely to be more depth and more. Obviously, it doesn't guarantee favorability, but it's likely to be a deeper story. So I think there's that should be leaders should still take that very seriously, I think. Um, I was just going to say on that topic of the past, sort of dealing with the past. I mean, I don't have um, an answer for dealing with it, how it surfaces in AI, but I just think from a media perspective, obviously, if there are past issues, that they are part of a lens through which journalists judge new actions of a leader. So I mean, you know, I think it's not so much about obviously you can't pretend that those things didn't happen. It's not even necessarily about moving on from them, but it's just being able to show over time that those past issues, whatever they were, are not that's not what the that's not how the leader is today. So I think that you know it's a case of whether the CEO is actually changing or just sort of trying to manage the perception. And obviously, the media wants to that they will respond favorably to seeing actual change.
Mm.
Yeah.
There is one question, there's one common theme that is appearing across multiple questions, which the audience would like to know. How should the CEO deliver a message during difficult times? Should they be vulnerable and resilient, or should they show strength? So I think this speaks to the quality, the emotion, open to anyone on the panel.
Yeah, I can take that, Divika, and David's already touched upon this. It's consistency is key, message consistency. We have a global leader right now in President Trump who is offering the opposite here. So we've seen that he has, he changes his messaging, even for the length of the conflict. There was one day where he had 5 different lengths of the conflict in one day. We can see that inconsistency, audiences and stakeholders do not react well to inconsistent messaging. David mentioned something really interesting about the need to align internal comms with external comms. Really, really important. It, other than that, I think my answer is be true to that leader. It's an individual thing. If you are comfortable in your skin of being vulnerable, if that's a good angle for you, is that if that's how you are positioning it, absolutely play into that. If it's not something that comes naturally, then that's going to be detected well. You're going to have some gaps in the way you're being perceived. So authenticity, I know this is a cliche, but it absolutely paramount to working out your approach and the way that you communicate those messages. If it's not in your wheelhouse, if you're not comfortable, we will see it from a mile away.
Perfect. I think we have time for one last question, which is a thought, a little bit more than a question, so an audience member would like to discuss. I hear and agree to most of what has been said. However, looking back at the past 5 years, I see more negative coverage linked to visible and vocal CEOs because being visible and vocal is a full-time job and it brings more risks versus benefits in my book. Whereas when you consider all the brilliant CEOs working low profile, simply focusing on their mission to ensure business growth and profitability, it brings just as good for the company in terms of reputation. I wonder whether that should be the most efficient way to look at CEO PR. In other words, visibility is not the answer to everything. A positive reputation for a CEO or a company is not necessarily linked to visibility. I'm Swiss, and by design, we act in a discreet manner, so maybe my view is influenced by that. Perhaps, Pearl, this ties back directly to your insights, so if you can leave us with some final thoughts on this.
I think, again, it's by industry and as what Kali said, how comfortable the CEO is in talking in front of the media and taking those challenging questions. Because there are CEOs like Piyush Gupta, who we know dominates the space of leadership and CEO visibility, and his positive coverage are super overwhelming. He's just a very charming guy who knows and very expertise in AI and digitalization, which acts in his favor. I wouldn't say that I wouldn't put a thing that more visibility equals to more negative coverage or equals to more positive coverage. It's actually very subjective, individual, and having to see the whole context to it because CEOs are often tied to the past company reputation, the achievements, and every other thing. So there are other metrics that we need to look at to see the success for CEOs and not just visibility. I'm not sure if David or Kali has anything to add about this thought process of CEO being visible and having more negative coverage.
I mean, I would just say, I think, the person who made that point said
Mm,
they were Swiss, and there's people tend to be discreet, but I think that's the case
mm,
in much of Asia too. And I
mm,
think CEOs who build good reputations in this region aren't necessarily the ones who talk the loudest.
mm,
But they're the people who link business performance with trust, I suppose, and
mm,
you know, the they come across as honest, and they speak on things that they know about, and where they can say something meaningful about those things. So I think it's never really about being the loudest or being the most visible.
mm. Uh, Not to be too contrary, David, but I've seen the opposite also work. And one fantastic comment and question from our audience. I want to thank whoever put that there. I have seen, and you can see going back years on the Boeing leadership, when we had unfortunately two Boeing plane crashes, 2018, 2019. There was a very big disadvantage if we do not know your CEO as an audience member, as a customer, if we do not know them, when they come out and face a crisis of human loss, we don't know them. So they're starting from the very beginning and they're having to introduce themselves and then having to talk about a very, very difficult topic. So in a case of very difficult crisis mode communications, there is an advantage if your stakeholders, if your audiences and customers are already trusting your CEO and leadership, because you're not starting from the beginning. You actually have a foundation of trust that you can go in and communicate through that crisis. So really, really strong benefits in having some visibility and a foundation of trust.
Thank you. That's all the time we have today. Some fantastic questions from the audience. I'm sorry if I didn't get to everyone, but you can find us on our LinkedIn and you can engage in a discussion with all of us. Well, that being said, we thank you all for your time, and the recording will be available soon. Have a good day, all. Thank you. Bye.